asher kidishanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu likroyes halel v'chatu Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kidishanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu likroyes
That was a beautiful Hallel that we had this morning at our show, led by our Rav, Yekusiel Kalmanson. And I put it on the Facebook page, the entire Hallel. I think it's about 19 minutes. So many beautiful melodies in that to welcome the new Hebrew month of Elul, the final month of the year. We are getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. We're examining our deeds this month. And this is the month where we hear the shofar every day, the wake-up call to examine our deeds. There we go. Is that a wake-up call? Melissa in Great Neck. And let's light up the darkness. And welcome Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in Missouri, Yehud in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shendor in the Bronx, Paul in the Great Northwest, Tom in PA, Behel is happy to be here, so is Lorraine in Texas, and Marjorie in Georgia, Haim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Ella's here, Frank in San Pedro, and Spencer in Connecticut. Welcome everybody. Opening a new chapter, chapter 5, here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. And we're continuing the discussion from chapter 4 of when something is sold, what is included in the sale, if the buyer and seller don't specify, if they don't do what they should do, which is get very specific about what's included and what's not. So then, just under general terms, what's included, and in this case, selling a ship. But this discussion of selling a ship is very quickly going to go to a very colorful place. Really interesting daf today, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, chapter 5, and our daf today is page 73, here in Tractate Bava Basra. Mishna number 1 of chapter 5. One who sells a ship has sold along with it the Torin and the Ness and the Ogin, and these terms will be defined, and all of the equipment that is used for directing the ship. But he has not sold the slaves who serve as oarsmen. Okay, thank God slavery's gone from this world for the most part. I know there are parts of the world where still it's practiced illegally, and please God, may that be ended as soon as possible. But here you're imagining the old days, right? The galleys, right? They're the slave galleys. These galleys powered by slaves. I was actually an oarsman in college. I was on the rowing team. But yeah, we only rowed a few hours a day, and we were into it. It was our sport. The slaves on these galleys, you can't say they're into it. Poor people. Okay, so the slaves are not included with the ship, nor are the packing bags that are used for transporting goods, nor the antiche. That'll be defined in a moment. And if one said to the buyer, you are purchasing it and all that it contains, then all of these elements would also be sold. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Torin, what is that? This is the mast of the ship, is also known as the Iskaria. And in this regard it states, they have taken cedars from Lebanon to make masts, Torin, for you, from Ezekiel 27:5. The Nes, that's a Hebrew word that usually means miracle, but here it means the sail. And in this regard, it states from Ezekiel 27:7, of fine linen with richly woven work from Egypt was your sail, that it might be to you for an ensign, a nes, right? So a nes is also a banner, and in this case, not a banner, but a sail. Now, with regard to the meaning of Ogin, Rabbi Chia teaches, these are the ship's anchors, and so it states, would you tarry for them until they were grown? Would you shut yourselves off for them, to Agena, and have no husbands? This is from the book of Ruth that we read on Shavuos, where Naomi is saying to her daughter-in-law, Ruth, why would you stay with me? Why would you want to accompany me? You should just, go back to your people and marry again now that you've been widowed from my son. But Ruth says she will be loyal to Naomi and stay with her. But the idea that if you stay with me, like I'm going to be an anchor to you in a bad way, right? In a bad way, that I'll drag you down and not allow you to find your future. But Ruth has tremendous emunah, great faith, that her destiny does lie with Naomi and Naomi's people. And she was right, and ultimately she comes back to Israel with Naomi, becomes a member of the Jewish people, and merits to be a predecessor, a matriarch, as it were, of King David. Okay. Now the Mishnah teaches, back to ships, the Mishnah teaches that the buyer acquires all the equipment used for directing the ship. So Rabbi Abba says, these are the ship's oars. And this is as it states, of the oaks of Bashan, they have made your oars. Again, Ezekiel 27, verse 6. Since a verse discussing ships focuses on its oars, so evidently the oars are an integral part of the ship. And if you wish, say instead that it is demonstrated from here, and all that handle the oar, the mariners, and all the pilots of the sea, shall come down from their ships. Very interesting battles that actually took place in the Mediterranean in the 1700s, primarily, somewhat in the 1800s as well, between British sailing ships and Algerian galleys that were in fact powered by slaves. Now, on a wind, right, with the wind blowing, I mean, the British ships, forget about it. They could never be caught. No wind, major problem, right, for them. So in a calm, in a clock calm, as it was known, so then the Algerians were indeed very dangerous, since their ships were powered by slaves with long oars. Let's keep going here. The sages taught, one who sells a ship has also sold the gangway that is used for boarding the ship and the water tank that it contains. And Rabbi Nassan says, one who sells a ship has sold the ship's boat, known as a bitzit, which is used as a lifeboat or for fishing in shallow waters. And Sumakos says, one who sells a ship has sold the dugit, as explained below. Rava said the bitzit is the same as the dugit, meaning the small boat, the ship's tender. And Rabbi Nassim was a Babylonian, and therefore he called small boats bitzits. As people say, the botzatia, meaning the small boats of Miashan, and Sumakos, who was from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, he called these boats dugit, as it is written, you shall be taken away with hooks, and your residue in fishing boats. Duga from the book of Amos in the Bible. New subject. The Gemara cites several incidents that involve ships and the conversation of seafarers. And this is where today's daf gets very colorful and spiritually fascinating. So Rabbah said, seafarers, right, sailors, related to me that when this wave that sinks a ship appears with a ray of white fire at its head, we strike it with clubs that are inscribed with the names of God. I am that I am. Ka, we'll say Ka is one of the names of God that normally would pronounce with a yud. But in this verse that they're reciting, I am that I am, a name of the Lord of hosts, Amen, Amen, Selah, and then the wave abates. Right, so the sailors are talking about when they get in trouble at sea, and there's some kind of a giant wave that will cause them to founder, right, to die, right, to sink, to be overwhelmed by such a wave, and the ship will capsize, and with the loss of all souls. That they're able to prevent that destruction by sort of beating back the wave by using the names of God. And this is understood in the notes to be a spiritual teaching, not so much an actual event that they would do on the water, though perhaps it was, but this idea that we are all ships at sea, and we all, sooner or later, encounter incredibly dangerous waves and periods in our lives and difficulties and challenges that could overwhelm us. And at those times, who do we rely on? Our Father in heaven, our Maker, our Creator, who loves us. We have to call out to God, and then we will receive the assistance we need. Rabbah said, seafarers related to me that in a certain place between one wave and the next wave, there are 300 parasangs, and the height of a wave is 300 parasangs. This is completely hyperbolic. It has to be hyperbolic because we're talking about a distance of 1,200 kilometers, right? 1,200 kilometers. A wave 1,200 kilometers high, and the next wave coming along behind that is 1,200 kilometers away. So we're meant to understand that we're talking about massive vicissitudes of some sort, and it's got to be some kind of a metaphor. And once seafarers recounted, we were traveling along the route, and a wave lifted us up until we saw the resting place of a small star. And it appeared to me the size of the area needed for scattering 40 of mustard seeds. And if the wave had lifted us a little higher, we would have been scorched by the heat of the star. So, sailors telling colorful tales of how dangerous it was, how tall the waves were, etc. But, there's a certain milieu among sailors, people, particularly in ancient times, but even much more recently, when we're talking about the great age of exploration, from the 1500s, even earlier, the 1400s, right up until the industrial age. And even now, when sailors are at sea, despite being surrounded by massive steel ships and radar and radios and navigation, etc., still terrible things can happen. But in those wooden sailing ships, 8 inches of oak between them and eternity, and there was definitely a kind of enhanced spirituality. The idea, no atheists in a foxhole, well, no atheists on a ship. And this idea that because peril really just, they never knew what they would encounter that day, and they were so far from any kind of rescue that they really felt like they were in the hands of God, in the hands of God's forces, as it were. And so there was this wave that lifted up the sailors near the stars, and the wave raised its voice and shouted to another wave, "My friend, did you leave anything in the world that you did not wash away, that I may come and destroy it?" And the second wave said to the first wave, "Go out and see the greatness of your master," meaning God. "And even when there is as much as a string of sand on the land, I cannot pass." Right? Meaning waves, as powerful as they are, have, there are tidal waves that, wash up, a short distance onto land. But for the most part, once you're on land, you're safe from the sea. Right? So God has arranged it so no matter how powerful and deadly the sea is, its power stops when it reaches the shore. Because with even as much as a string of sand on the land, I cannot pass. As it is stated from Jeremiah 5:22, "Will you not fear me," meaning God, "said the Lord? Will you not tremble at my presence, who has placed the sand for the bound of the sea, an everlasting ordinance which it cannot pass?" Next, Rabbah said, "I have seen the one called Hermon, the son of Lilith." There's all kinds of literature about Lilith. That's actually beyond the scope of today's class. But this son of Lilith, different interpretations of who he might be. One possibility is he was a demon, some kind of a demon. In the Jerusalem Talmud, very little mention of demons. In the Babylonian Talmud, quite a bit of demonology. Perhaps reflecting the idea that there was, greater interest in and manifestation of demons, right? And so we've seen many times in the Talmud this idea, for example, don't enter a ruin alone. You should always go with another person because demons lurk there and can cause harm to people. So one interpretation of this is that Hermon was a demon and a powerful demon. And another interpretation is that he was a human, but he was a human who was interested in sorcery and magic, and performing, supernatural feats for audiences to call attention to himself. So Rabbah said, "I've seen the one called Hermon," Hurmin in this version here, "the son of Lilith, when he was running on the pinnacles of the wall of the city of Mechoza, and a horseman was riding an animal below him, but was unable to catch up to him because he ran so fast. And once they saddled for him 2 mules, and they stood on the 2 bridges of the river Rognag, and he jumped from this one to that one, and from that one to this one. And he was holding 2 cups of wine in his hands, and was pouring from this one to that one, and from that one to this one, and not one drop fell to the ground." Sounds like a fun circus act. "And that day was stormy," similar to the description in a verse dealing with the seafarers. Quote, "They mounted up to the heavens, they went down to the deeps, their soul melted away because of trouble," from Psalm 107. And he continued in this manner, this Hermon continued in this manner, until word of his behavior was heard in the house of the king, and they killed him. So according to the interpretation that he was some sort of demon, he attracted the attention of the demon king, who was vexed with him because he allowed himself to become too visible to the humans, thus endangering demon kind, I guess. And so they did away with him. And according to the interpretation that Hermon was some kind of a magician, the king of that area found him to be a little too show-offy and had him killed. We're on page 73b. Rabbah said, "I have seen a day-old antelope," and urzilla, "that was as large as Mount Tabor." How large is Mount Tabor? Well, it is 4 parsangs. Right? Each parsang is about 4 kilometers, so this is 16 kilometers, big mountain. And the length of its neck was 3 parsangs, and the place where his head rests was a parsang and a half, and it cast feces, and thereby dammed up the Jordan. So some kind of a massive antelope, and it was only a day-old antelope, so it was a baby antelope that was so large that, dwarfed Godzilla, and its feces dammed up the Jordan River. What is Rabbah telling us? Did he really see such a thing? perhaps he did. Perhaps he did, in the sense that he was granted a vision of something. Prophecy ended at the end or near the beginning of the Second Temple period. But there still is Ruach HaKodesh, a kind of a divine spirit that enables certain worthy people to see certain things at certain times. For the purpose of communicating some kind of a Torah lesson. So what did he see? What was this antelope? A day-old antelope. So according to some commentaries, this antelope is a parable describing Joshua. And he is described figuratively as possessing the horns of an antelope because he achieved great victories and caused the water in the Jordan to stand still for one of his battles. Others maintain that this is a critical depiction, which is referring to a young student who is unaware of his ignorance and imagines himself to be as great and mighty as Mount Tabor. In fact, he will besmirch and ruin truly great Torah scholars, just as the animal leaves feces that besmirch and ruin his environment. Alternatively, the animal represents the nascent religion of Christianity that arose and spread rapidly, becoming a mighty force. And from the point of view of the sages, what does the feces have to do with this? It's that kind of the offshoots of that new religion had a very negative impact on the spirit of the Jewish nation, right? Because sadly, at the beginning of the rise of Christianity, there were many Jews who were drawn away from Torah Judaism in pursuit of this new religion until it was, separated out, and it was like, that's one religion, this is another religion. In the beginning, there was a confusion, and that caused problems from the perspective of our sages. Let us continue. And Rabba Bar Chana said, I have seen a certain frog. Now, this is another parable. See if you can guess what it might be about. Rabba Bar Chana said, I have seen a certain frog, akrokta, that was as large as the fort, meaning the word for that is akra. So it's a frog as large as the fort of Hagronia. And how large is the fort of Hagronia? It is as large as 60 houses. So it's a big frog. A snake came and swallowed the frog. A raven came and swallowed the snake and flew up and sat in a tree. And come and see how great is the strength of the tree, which could bear the weight of that raven that ate the snake. The raven that ate the snake that ate the frog. And Rav Papa Bar Shmuel said, if I had not been there and seen this, I would not believe it. So they were shown something. What they're really getting at is, okay, it had the form of a frog, a snake, a raven, a tree. But it was obviously something much greater than that. We're not talking about an actual frog, snake, raven. We're talking about some kind of a vision that they were shown that represented something going on in the world. And that's why Rav Papa Bar Shmuel said, if I had not been there and seen it, I would not believe it. In other words, if I had not seen this application, what this means in the world. Yes, I was shown it, but I was shown it for a reason. And so in the note, we learn that what they're talking about is the empires, right? So we're talking about empires. The frog was Israel in the beginning when we came into the promised land and we had the sovereign Jewish nation in the land of Israel until we did not merit to have it anymore. And then it was defeated by Babylonia. The Babylonians were eventually replaced by the Greeks. The Greeks were replaced by the Romans. And we're still in that exile. Although ancient Rome is gone, we're still in that exile that was created by the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And Rabba Bar Chana said, once we were traveling in a ship, and we saw a certain fish. A second. Set this. Yep. Once we were traveling in a ship, and we saw a certain fish, in whose nostril of the fish, a mud eater had sat. Now, the mud eater is an insect that's in the nostril of a fish. And the waters thrust the fish and threw it upon the shore. And how big was this fish? 60 neighborhoods were destroyed by the fish, and 60 neighborhoods ate from the fish, and another 60 neighborhoods salted its meat to preserve it. And they filled from one of its eyeballs 300 flasks of oil. And when we returned there, after 12 months of the year had passed, we saw that they were cutting beams from its bones, and they had set out to build those neighborhoods that had been destroyed when the fish originally washed on shore. So what, again, very hyperbolic, what are we talking about? In the note, the fish might symbolize a righteous person, as the righteous are frequently compared to fish. In that case, the story teaches that a small imperfection can cause a righteous man to falter, and his failure leads to the collapse of many others. And the story shows that ultimately there is a positive outcome as the ruins are rebuilt. So now in Elul, a perfect time to reflect on such a story, that no matter how much you've made progress in your spiritual journey, made progress in being a kinder, stronger, more righteous person, temptation is always crouching at your door. It is so easy to falter, so easy to make big mistakes. But if we do make big mistakes, God also created, even before he created the world, he created teshuvah, atonement. All right, so he knew that he was creating a world where there were going to be imperfect people with free will. And so he also created an opportunity for them to make up for and atone for their transgressions. And so there can always be a positive outcome no matter how dark things seem. And Rabba Bar Chana said, once we were traveling on a ship and we saw certain fish upon which sand had settled and grass grew on it. And we assumed that it was dry land. And we went up and baked and cooked on the back of the fish. But when its back grew hot, it turned over. And were it not for the fact that the ship was close by, we would have drowned. Okay, so they thought they were mooring their ship at an island, and they went ashore on the island, and they were enjoying their time there. It seemed like a little paradise. There was sand and trees, and it turned out that this was no island at all. They were in fact walking on the back of a giant fish, say a whale, a massive whale, that had just been, floating there long enough that its back started to resemble a piece of land. But, when these Jews started getting comfortable there, the whale decided to just, roll over and go on its way. And this is taken to be a lesson. Jews should never feel too comfortable assimilating into any nation on earth, because history has shown, these guys were writing 2,000 years ago. And history has proven over and over and over again that in every generation, they rise up to destroy us, right? This Jew hatred, it's the oldest hatred that there is. We can't understand it. There is no rational explanation for it. There's just always people out there who hate Jews. And from time to time, they come into power and hurt Jews and kill Jews and hurt the Jewish people. And we should never feel too comfortable wherever we land. The events of the last year, I would say this needs no further explanation. And Rabba Bar Chana said, once we were traveling in a ship, and the ship traveled between one fin, shitza, and the other fin of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights. That's how big that fish was. And the fish was swimming in the opposite direction of the ship, so that it was swimming upward against the wind and the waves, and we were sailing downward. And if you would say that the ship did not travel very fast, well, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said in the short amount of time required to heat a kettle of water, that ship can travel 60 parasangs. And another demonstration of its speed is that a horseman shot an arrow, and yet the ship was traveling so swiftly that it outraced it. And Rav Ashi said that fish was a sea geldana, which has 2 sets of fins. Now, another way to understand what's going on here, there's an old saying about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, of Hasidic Judaism. where there were many, many, many tales and legends about the Baal Shem Tov, including many in which he's somehow able to bend time and space. Like he's traveling on a horse and wagon, but they leave one town, and a few hours later they arrive in another town hundreds of miles away, obviously far beyond the technology that existed in the 1700s when he lived. So was it just a myth, that was used to colorfully describe somebody whose spiritual attainments were tremendous and who so influenced, generations of Jews ever since? Or did the Baal Shem Tov have access to some kind of a higher world? And he was able to actually, move through, let's say, some kind of other dimension and come out the other side. And perhaps these sages also had access to some other dimension, some other realm, as it were, a higher realm, a spiritual realm, where the imagery might, resemble what we see here. There are fish, there are ships, there are oceans, but the stuff that all of that world is made of is the stuff that dreams are made of. The rules are different. Physics does not apply there the way it applies here. It's possible. I'm going to say just one more thought about that, and this is just from Sal, not from the sages. But long before I became, I returned to Judaism and became interested in Talmud, I was very interested in physics, in science fiction. And, all science fiction books, look at Dune most recently, Star Trek, Star Wars. Interstellar distances are so vast that for the stories to work, they absolutely have to have some kind of faster than light speed. And they call that warp speed, right? And that's different names, depending on which science fiction story you're talking about. And perhaps one day we will discover some kind of physics that enables warp speed. But so far, physics as it's understood in our world, we can't travel faster than light. That's just the fastest that something can move. There is something called quantum entanglement, which suggests some kind of a communication across interstellar distances. But in terms of actual movement from one place to another, this is utterly impossible according to physics as we understand it. But if there was communication and even travel, between the stars in the past, happening now or in the future, who knows? Then perhaps the way that happens is that they exit, our physical world, enter that spiritual realm, and re-enter in another place in the physical world. It's possible. Let us continue with the matter at hand. Once we were traveling in a ship, and a certain bird, Rabbi Bar Chana still speaking. We were traveling in a ship, and we saw a certain bird that was standing with water up to its ankles. And its head was in the sky, and we said to ourselves that there is no deep water here. And we wanted to go down to cool ourselves off. And a divine voice emerged and said to us, "Do not go down here." As the axe of a carpenter fell into this body of water 7 years ago, and it has still not reached the bottom. And this is not because the water is so large and deep, rather it is because the water is turbulent. And Rav Ashi said, and that bird is called the Ziz Sadai, wild beast. As it is written, I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the Ziz Sadai is mine, says God in Psalm 50. And Rabbi Bar Chana said, once we were traveling in the desert, and we saw these geese whose wings were sloping because they were so fat, and streams of oil flowed beneath them. And I said to them, shall we have a portion of you in the world to come? And one raised a wing, and one raised a leg, signaling an affirmative response. And when I came before Rabbi Elazar, he said to me, the Jewish people will eventually be held accountable for the suffering of the geese. Since the Jews en masse do not repent, right? So many Jews are wayward and distant from Torah. The geese are forced to continue to grow fat as they wait to be given to the Jewish people as a reward. but we have not yet earned that reward. Now the Gemara provides a mnemonic for the items that were shown by an Arab man to our colorful narrator, Rabba Bar Bar Chana, in the following stories. So the memory device is dust, sky blue, scorpion, basket, right? Dust of the sky blue and the scorpion stung the basket. 4 stories involving dust, sky blue, thread, the techeiles, a scorpion, and a basket. So Rabba Bar Bar Chana said, once we were traveling in the desert, and we were accompanied by a certain Arab who would take dust and smell it and say, this is the road to such and such a place, and that is the road to such and such a place. And we said to him, how far are we from water? And he said to us, bring me dust. We brought it to him, and he said, we are 8 parasangs from water. Later, we said this a second time, and gave him dust. And he said to us that we are at a distance of 3 parasangs. And I switched the type of dust to test him, but I could not confuse him. He was an expert in this matter. Whenever, by smelling the dust, he knew where he was and how far or near he was from water. The Arab said to me, come, I will show you the dead of the wilderness, i.e., the Jewish people who left Egypt and died in the wilderness as a punishment for their lack of faith. In the incident of the spies, God sentenced them to die in the wilderness and that their children would be the ones to enter the promised land. So the Arab brought me and I went and saw them, right? The people who died in the wilderness. And they had the appearance of one who is intoxicated. Now we're on page 74a, getting a little head start on tomorrow. And they were lying on their backs. And the knee of one of them was elevated, and he was so enormous that the Arab entered under his knee while riding a camel, and with his spear upright, and he did not touch the knee that was lifted above him. I cut one corner of the sky blue garment that contains the ritual fringes, the tzitzis, of one of them, and then we were unable to walk. And the Arab said to me, perhaps you took something from them? Return it, as we know by tradition that one who takes something from them cannot walk. I then returned the corner of the garment, and then we were able to walk. Now, what he's referring to is, for many centuries, tzitzis, the ritual fringes that Jewish men have to wear on cornered garments, like our prayer shawls, and we also have I have a garment under my shirt. It's a 4-cornered undershirt that has the tzitzis at the corners. The tzitzis, by command from the Torah, is meant to include a blue thread, but it's a very particular blue, the sky blue, known as techeiles, and the dye of that blue was created by a particular sea snail. And at a certain point, it became unaffordable and unobtainable, and then tzitzis were just white for many centuries. In modern times, there are, tremendous experts who have good, solid reason to believe that they have identified that correct sea snail and that the blue dye extracted from it is the right blue dye. And so a lot of guys are now having the blue thread in the tzitzis again, though there are also, lots of people in the Jewish world that don't hold by the modern blue. And think that, no, we don't have it yet. We won't have it until Mashiach comes. So that's just one of those little disagreements that exist in the world of the Orthodox. At any rate, this was during the time probably when it was lost. And so since Rabba Bar Bar Chana was given this opportunity to see the original blue on some garment miraculously preserved of these people who died in the wilderness when they left Egypt, he wanted to get that blue and bring it back, but he was not able to do that. And when I came, and says Rabba Bar Bar Chana, when I came before the sages, they said to me in rebuke, every Abba is a donkey and every Bar Bar Chana is an idiot. They did not sugarcoat the rebuke. For the purpose of clarifying what law, what halacha did you do that? If you wanted to know whether the law is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai or in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, as to whether there are 4 or 3 threads and joints in ritual fringes, in that case there was no need to take anything with you, as you should have simply counted the threads and counted the joints. So not about the color of the techeiles, but rather about how they were tied. Rabba Bar Chana continues, and again, there are different ways of tying tzitzis even today. So Rabba Bar Chana continues his account. The Arab also said to me, come, I will show you Mount Sinai, where the Torah was given, which we don't know where it is. There is a place, I think there's a Christian monastery there, and people say this could very well be Mount Sinai, but according to Jewish tradition, we don't know where Mount Sinai is. Perhaps that will be revealed when Mashiach comes. The Arab also said, come, I will show you Mount Sinai. And I went and saw that scorpions were encircling it, and they were standing as high as white donkeys. And I heard a divine voice saying, now in this case it's God speaking, woe is me that I took an oath, and now that I took the oath, who will nullify it for me? Meaning God took an oath, who can nullify God's oath? When I came before the sages, they said to me in rebuke, every Abba is a donkey and every Bar Chana is an idiot. You should have said, your oath is nullified. And the Gemara explains, and Rabba Bar Chana did not nullify the oath because he reasoned, perhaps God is referring to the oath that he will not flood the earth again. But the sages would argue that if that were so, why would he say, woe is me? Rather, this must be referring to God's oath of exile upon the Jewish people, anthropomorphizing and suggesting that God loves the Jewish people so much that even though he knows, because he's God, that he did the right thing in exiling the Jewish people for as long as we've been exiled, it hurts God, right? God feels feels the pain of our exile and sort of wishes that he could go back on his own word. Rabba Bar Chana continues his account. The Arab also said to me, come, I will show you those who were swallowed by the earth due to the sin of Korach, right? When Korach rebelled against Moses. So I saw 2 rifts in the ground that were issuing smoke. And the Arab took a shearing of wool and dipped it in water and inserted it on the head of a spear and placed it in there. And when he removed the wool, it was scorched. And he said to me, listen to what you hear. And I heard that the voices in this abyss, right, Korach and his followers who rebelled against Moses, and then the earth swallowed them alive. It's like they're still there, right? They're still there and they're still speaking. And what are they saying? They're saying Moses and his Torah are true. And they, meaning we the ones swallowed up by the earth, euphemism for ourselves, and we in the earth are liars. And the Arab further said to me, every 30 days, Gehenna, right, the underworld where it's like a purgatory, every 30 days, Gehenna returns them to here, like meat in a pot that is moved around by the boiling water as it cooks. And every time they say this, they say the same thing. Moses and his Torah are true, and we in the earth are liars. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. This is just the final couple of sentences. And the Arab also said to me, come, I will show you the place where the earth and the heavens touch each other. And I took my basket and placed it in a window of the heavens. And after I finished praying, I searched for it, but I did not find it. And I said to him, are there thieves here where the earth touches the heaven? And he said to me, no. This is the heavenly sphere that is turning around. Wait here until tomorrow, and you will find your belongings when they come back around. As promised, colorful. A colorful day. Let's see who's got some comments. Bill, sailing has always been a profession shot through and through with such strange and colorful amount of folk religious practices. With due respect to the notes, I'd bet $1 it really did happen from time to time, but of course that doesn't mean the spiritual teaching isn't also true. It obviously is. Agreed. Lucy, these stories make me think of Marc Chagall's paintings. I wonder if he painted some of those. Very interesting. I'm reading Dara Horn's book right now, The World to Come, in which Chagall is a character. Fascinating. I need to learn more about Chagall. Bill Eldridge also says, yes, St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Peninsula. I can't speak for the monks who are Coptic Orthodox, not my tradition. But the way I had it given to me was there is a tradition of venerating this mountain as Mount Sinai, but that's all we know for sure. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And may your Elul lift you up, right? It's a time of fear and trepidation and joy and exaltation. As we examine our deeds and identify that which needs working on, we're well on our way to making a correction. We've got to pray for help all of this month to examine, to figure out what we got to do and how we're going to do it, and ask God to help us in that process.